I don't wait on miracles. The West chews them to gristle. But the night Harlan Tate bluffed his last silver at Cutter's lantern and walked out of that smoke-thick saloon with a feed-sack crate holding 2 newborns, the bat wings thumped and the wind changed. If you wonder what a man can hold with both hands, settle in. This one pays out late and true. Smoke had a way of settling inside Cutter's lantern, like a bad thought that wouldn't leave the room. The lamp over the back table swung on its chain, slow as a porch cradle, throwing a pale circle on the worn green felt. Cards whispered, boots ticked, men breathed through their teeth so the smoke wouldn't bite. Harlan Tate sat at the edge of that light with empty pockets and a heart like a dry well. In his vest, folded twice and then again as if you could crease truth thin enough to change it, lay a doctor's scrap, Infertile. The word felt like a burr in his shirt. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Small, mean, impossible to ignore. He kept his thumb on the scarred edge of the table the way a man grips a fence post in a high wind. Across from him, Silas Cutter smiled with all the warmth of a rimfire. "Winner takes all," he said, and fanned the deck like he was airing out a lie. All. Tonight wasn't a bull team or a saddle. It sat by the upright piano, a feed-sack-lined crate with 2 swaddled lumps inside and a fretful sound that wasn't quite crying, more the thin, stubborn rasp of life hanging on. A couple of boys at the bar snickered. One of them, the kind that chewed to look older, nudged his friend with an elbow. By the stove, old Hutch watched Harlan with eyes that had seen more winters than fences. He spat a leaf of tobacco into the ashpan. "Son," he rasped, "this wind'll skin you, for the Lord hears you." Harlan didn't look up. He slid what he had into the light. A silver coin rubbed thin by years, Sarah's small cross bright where a thumb had worried it, and the only thing left that still carried weight. "The Tate name," he said, steady. The room made a sound like a cough that remembered to be quiet. Silas' grin crooked. "Name ain't worth much in a place like this." But he dealt, because men like him couldn't help themselves. Cards slapped down, 4, 5, something final in each soft smack. Harlan didn't chase his breath. He watched the crate. One of the lumps stirred and a tiny hand came free of cloth, reaching for nothing and everything. The lamp swung, the bat wings thumped. Somebody laughed and then swallowed it. Harlan lifted his cards as if he were lifting a hymn book, slow and respectful. He saw what he needed to see, which wasn't much. Some nights the trail just turned and you either rode it or let it throw you. Silas showed first, wide smile, dirty teeth. Then the smile died on his face like a lantern snuffed. Harlan laid his hand down without ceremony. There was no gloat in him. The wind felt like a prayer a man says with his hat on because he doesn't know how to take it off anymore. He stood, boots under chairs, twitched to make space. He crossed the room the way a man crosses spring ice, sure in the feet, careful in the soul, and bent to lift the crate. It was lighter than fear, heavier than grief. He tucked it to his chest. Something pressed against the boards from the inside, small as a sparrow's foot. Old Hutch watched him pass. Harlan paused long enough to answer the old warning, voice low, almost kind. "Let the wind be witness." He shouldered the door with his back. The bat wings clapped behind him like a verdict. Night rolled up from Main Street, cold enough to cut. The sky over Juniper Mesa ran black as a creek bed, stars thrown across it like ash. Blue, his gelding stamped and snorted a white cloud. Harlan set the crate gentle across the saddle blankets and tied 2 careful knots you'd use on a skittish calf or a future you weren't ready to name. The street was near empty. One lantern bobbing at Lacey Dunn's store, a dog worrying a shadow. The town itself holding its breath, as if the next sound might matter more than the one before. Somewhere a piano tried and failed to find a tune. Harlan checked the lash again, palm flat on rough wood, feeling the faint scrape of tiny breath inside. He swung up. Blue took the bit without fuss, like he understood a different kind of freight. Harlan set his heels and turned toward the dark slope, the crate riding easy against his thigh. Behind him, Cutter's lantern exhaled its smoke and swallowed its noise. Ahead, the road tilted toward the mesa, quiet as snowfall. He didn't have a plan. He had a horse that knew the way home and 2 lives that didn't. It was enough to start a man moving. The road to Juniper Mesa climbs in patient switchbacks, a place where a man hears his own horse more than his thoughts. Blue took it steady. The crate thumped soft against Harlan's thigh, a counting stone, and each little stir from inside said, "I'm here, I'm still here, don't set me down where it's cold." The cabin waited with its shoulders hunched against the wind. Harlan swung down, shouldered the door, and the dry room smell rose. Old pine, mouse dust, a memory of smoke. He set the crate on the table, listened for the thin rasp of breath, then crossed to the hearth. The ashes there were gray and sullen. He worked a match with a thumbnail, set it to curls of shavings, blew until the new flame took like it was shy of being seen. Coals found their color, red as berries under snow. He climbed the ladder to the loft and dragged out the old cradle, canvas wrapped stiff with years. He cut the twine with his pocket knife and peeled the cloth away. Dust lifted and drifted like a ghost deciding to leave. He remembered Sarah's laugh, light and careful, the way she'd palmed that cradle, as if her hand could will it full. He set the cradle near the fire, wedged a wobble with a folded scrap of wood, and lined it with a clean shirt, tore into strips. He opened the crate and lifted the first bundle. Light bones, birds small, the baby's lips worked at the air, trying for milk that wasn't there yet. "Easy," he said, voice gone soft without asking him. He warmed a rag in a pan, wiped the little face. "Mercy," he decided, because something about the stubborn breath asked for that word. He laid her in the cradle, and she made a noise like a question answered. The second child had a faint red streak on her cheek, a brushstroke you could miss if you rushed. She fixed him with eyes not quite focusing, then gripped his thumb like she'd made up her mind about him. "June," he said, because this hard country still saved its best light for June. He set her beside Mercy and tucked the shirt blanket around both. The fire settled into a working glow. Steam feathered off the pan. Harlan stood a long minute with his hands on the cradle's rim, feeling the heat touch his knuckles and the chill lift out of the room. There are nights a man earns by the breath, and this was one. At first light, he rode down to town for formula and cloth. Lacey Dunn stood behind her counter, hair pinned hard, eyes reading more than his words gave. Without being asked, she slid 2 tins across, then reached under for a third, and set it quiet on the plank. "Don't ask the price, Mr. Tate," she said. "Last night I heard 2 babies breathing." He touched the brim. That was all. Doc Weatherby met him on the boardwalk, coat unbuttoned, whiskers gone the color of smoke. "Warm the bottles on the back iron," he muttered. "Not too hot. Drop a bit on your wrist. Little one that's slow. Keep her upright after feeding. Bacon grease will do for chapped lips if you're out of better." The old man looked away like men do when they've been kinder than they meant. Sunday bell rolled from the white church as Harlan tied the bundle to Blue's horn. Out front, Reverend Merrick shook hands and told a joke, thin as soup. Then his gaze found Harlan and gentled. "The Lord redeems by odd roads," he said simply. Harlan nodded because anything more would have broken something he wasn't ready to name. Back up the grade, the day went bright and then dim again, clouds walking the mesa. In the cabin, he taught himself a clumsy routine. Fire tended, water set, bottles warmed on the stove lip, careful drops on the wrist. Mercy fought for the nipple and then settled, eyes going heavy. June fussed until he held her against his shirt, and talked nonsense to the rafters. He changed them with rag and twine, made a line by the window, and hung linen to dry, watched the light touch it and come away cleaner. Toward afternoon, the place began to sound like a home. Little breaths, the rocker's small complaint, Blue cropping what grass the yard could spare. Harlan sat by the cradle with his palms open on his knees, waiting for the next need like a man waiting for weather. That's when he heard hoofbeats on the climb, not hurried, not friendly. He stood and stepped to the door. Down the track, Sheriff Tom Quill rose in the saddle, brim low, a second rider keeping close behind, a woman small-shouldered, hat cinched tight with a strip of faded blue. Dust came with them and the sound of a thing about to be decided. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They drew up in a soft grit cloud and let the horses breathe. Sheriff Tom Quill stayed to the saddle, hat brim cutting his eyes in half. The woman slid down behind him, small, neat, the sort of tired that rides deep. A strip of blue linen held her hat, the color worn to sky. "Mr. Quill said, voice like a boot heel on plank. "This here's Ada Kinsley, sews out at the stage depot. Her sister. Didn't make it through dry arroyo. Word says those little ones are kin." He touched his brim and gave Harlan a look that was both duty and sympathy, then backed his gelding off a few steps. "I'm not here to pry. I'm here so folks talk plain." Ada didn't reach for the cradle. She planted her hands on the rail instead, knuckles pale. "I heard about them," she said, the sound roughened like it had come a long way on bad road. "If one's to be hers by right, I'll work for that right. I can feed, change, sit the night, if that's what's needed." Harlan let the words live in the room before he answered. Blue switched his tail. The fire ticked. June made a little kitten sound and went still. "A week," Harlan said. "You stay. You do the small things right, the hungry hour, the cough, the wet. You earn her, not from me." He tipped his chin toward the cradle. "From the child." Ada's eyes shone once and then steadied. "That's fair." Sheriff Quill nodded once, like a judge who'd seen a decent bargain at last, and turned his horse. "I'll ride the lower fence," he said to the air, which meant, "I'll be nearby if it turns." His hoofbeats thinned into the wash. Inside, Ada took the rocker by the hearth as if it were a pew. She unpinned a small thing from her dress, a silver butterfly pin, wings cut fine, and set it on the mantel, then drew that strip of blue linen from her pocket, smoothed it across her knees. "My sister stitched letters into hems," she said, almost to herself. "All I kept was this pin." Harlan set a bottle to warm on the back iron, the water giving off a breath of steam. "Then stitch this house back together, if you can." They began. It wasn't graceful. Ada's hands were sure with cloth, clumsy with the rest at first. Mercy rooted and found the bottle, eyes rolling sweet and heavy. Ada held her properly, head high, back padded, soft, humming no tune at all and somehow finding one. Needle winked in her fingers when a diaper needed mending. She turned a flour sack into 2 serviceable squares before the stew came to a simmer. June was a different song. She'd fuss and pitch until Harlan laid her long ways on his shirt and spoke nonsense toward the rafters. Then she'd quiet like a colt finding the gate, one hand catching his finger and holding on with all a small life's stubborn. He didn't mind the hold. It told him what to do without saying. Ada rose to every small alarm. Water too hot, fire too low, milk done, milk not yet. Learning the map of the room the way a seamstress reads grain. When the cradle rocked uneven and knocked, Harlan shaved a sliver off a cedar shim and tamped it under the lame foot. Ada lifted the blue linen and covered the scar in the rail, smoothing it until the wood and cloth agreed with one another. The cradle look claimed then, not borrowed. By evening, the cabin had settled into a working quiet. Ada rinsed bottles in a pan and set them to dry where the light could find them. Harlan stepped outside to listen to the wind make its narrow sound in the wire and to let his back loosen where the day had held it tight. Blue cropped at the edge of the yard, tail switching in rhythm with the rocker's faint, steady squeak. When he came back in, Mercy was asleep against Ada's shoulder, a damp crescent on her dress. June had gone soft across his forearm. Ada looked up, lips pressed, but not hard. "I'll make shift on the floor," she said. "You take the bed. I'm not afraid of splinters." "You'll take the rocker," he said, setting June down and adjusting the blanket so both small chests rose in a tidy duet. "Rocker tells a person what the night needs." Ada almost smiled. She reached for the butterfly pin, considered it, then set it again on the mantel beside Sarah's cross, as if the two might learn to live side by side. Outside, a gust shouldered the eaves. The old triangle bell, a relic Sarah had hung for calling hands in better years, gave one thin shiver, a single note sliding off into the evening. Harlan raised his head at the sound, a man who knows when the wind has changed, and when it's only saying hello. Days folded like cloth. The cabin learned their names and began to answer to them. Ada moved with a steadier hand now. Bottles warmed on the back iron until a thin breath rose. Flour sacks cut and hemmed into square diapers with a stitch you could trust. She kept a low humming in her throat. No words. Just a line that held the room together like selvage. When the cradle knocked against the plank, Harlan planed a cedar sliver and tamped it under the lame leg. Ada touched the scar where the rail had splintered and laid her blue linen over it, smoothing until wood and cloth seemed to agree. Claimed, not borrowed. That's how it looked. Mercy fed, heavy-eyed. June lay crosswise on Harlan's shirt front and searched his buttons like they were small stars. Afternoons the wind came down off Juniper Mesa and nosed the eaves. The old triangle bell barely whispered, a metal breath more felt than heard. Ada began to read the fire the way a plainswoman reads weather, how the flame leaned when the door opened, how the kettle talked when the babies were close to waking. The house took its rhythm from small chores, done exactly once and then again. On the fifth night, hoofs showed along the lower fence, slow, looking. A rider kept his seat like a dare and let the horse blow. He was cutter lean, a mean tilt to the shoulders. He flipped a half cigar into the yard. The pin coal hit mud and winked red. "This ain't over," he said, voice flat as a shovel. He touched his brim to no one and turned the horse, leaving deep hoofprints that filled with a thread of water from the pump spill. In the dusk beyond the corral, old Hutch shifted on the cut bank and let his voice carry just enough. "Knife in that boy's eyes," he muttered. Then he went still again, a stump that happened to breathe. Harlan watched the road a long moment, then shut the door with the quiet a man saves for promises. He set the rifle across the pegs and checked the latch on the fulcrum hatch, fingertips counting the iron tacks like beads. 3 rings on the bell means the cellar, he said, not loud. Ada folded the last of the clean cloth and slid it into the willow basket. "I can hear it," she answered, eyes on the hearth, "in the way the fire shakes." He nodded. They didn't say Silas Cutter's name or the kin that might ride for him, and names can wake trouble when trouble's trying to sleep. They went on with the small work. Ada stitched while the rocker spoke in its slow voice. Harlan stepped out to knock ashes from the stovepipe and felt the air thinning toward frost. In the yard, the cigar stub lay like a thought somebody had tried and failed to swallow. He towed dirt over it, not to hide it, only to mark where the talk had turned. Night gathered clean. He brought the rifle in and set it where his hand wouldn't have to hunt for it. The babies breathed their double music. The lamp took one more breath and then lowered itself without fuss. Outside, the bell lifted and settled once, like a horse switching weight. Harlan eased the hammer back with his thumb until the seer caught, listening to the dry click say what it always said. Be ready, but don't rush it. Then he lowered it gentle as you lay a sleeping child back into the dark. Morning came level and cold. Harlan set a ladder under the eave and lifted the old triangle bell into proper place, the iron tongue bright where years of hands had found it. He tied a short rope and tested one soft ring. The sound walked the yard and came back smaller, like a promise you could keep. 3 rings he saved for trouble. He told the doorframe that, and the doorframe remembered. They sacked the windows with sand. Ada filled Gunny with the shovel, tamped with the heel of her hand, and Harlan stacked the weight along the sills until the frame sat deeper and the glass knew it was looked after. By the hatch he took a nail and scratched a code into the beam. 3 short lines, 3 Zwendler, 1 long line under it, 1 almost all clear. Ada touched the marks as if they were stitches she'd set herself. The town found them before noon. Reverend Merrick came first with a crate that clinked. Candles, diapers, a jar of salve, and a little sack of peppermint somebody's wife had spared. He set the bundle down gentle as bread. Homes are held together by small light, he said, and looked at the babies until the corners of his mouth softened. Behind him, Sheriff Tom Quill rode up with dust on his boots and duty on his shoulders. He tipped his brim, eyes on the bell, on the sand, on the cradle by the fire. Harlan Tate, he said, the words measured. I'm swearing you deputy for now. Paper's thin, but it's law enough a man like Silas can understand. He handed over a tin star notched by use. Harlan didn't pin it. He put it on the mantel beside Sarah's cross and Ada's butterfly, where all the promises lived. Law shows late, the sheriff said, half a sigh. But in time, the Reverend answered, tying up his reins. They stayed for coffee that had worked too long on the stove, and for the quiet that families lend one another when there's nothing to fix just then. The babies breathed easy. Blue swished at flies that weren't there yet. Ada hemmed a flour sack square and set it to the side with the other neat stacks, her needle catching the light like a thought you could follow. Dusk came clean, edges sharp. The ridge took on that listening look, and the wire sang its one-note hymn. Harlan checked the cellar latch with 2 fingers, set the rifle where his hand would find it, and hung the bell rope so it would fall straight. They felt the riders before they heard them, air going cautious, fire leaning a touch. Then 2 shapes, and Silas slid along the fence, torches at saddle height, faces turned small by the dark. They didn't rush, they sidled, the way a snake tries a door. Ada gathered the babies and stepped toward the hatch without being told. Harlan moved to the window and rested the barrel on a folded coat to keep the glass from knowing. When the first torch lip showed in the yard, he lifted the rifle, sighted on the rock by the pump, and touched 1 clean shot. Stone spat bright. The torch jerked, then steadied. Somebody cursed soft and meant it. Harlan did not speak. He let the echo talk for him. Upslope, other lanterns woke. First 1, then 3, then a small string climbing the grade like a slow river of fire. Reverend Old Hutch, 2 field hands from Sagebrush Fork, the kind of company a ridge remembers. Their light made long gun shadows pace along the cabin wall, tall men who didn't need to do more than stand. Silas breathed through his teeth. Not tonight, he said to no one brave enough to answer, and backed off, the torches drawing thin as the yard grew larger without them. Hoofs clicked on stone, then brushed sand, then were gone. The bell rope never moved. It trembled once in a draft and went still. Harlan stood at the window until the dark rounded over and forgot the shapes it had held. He lowered the rifle, eased the hammer, and drew a breath that had waited an hour to be taken. Ada came up from the hatch with Mercy drowsy and June frowning like she'd missed something important. They sat a while, all four, letting the room be a room again. Night finished its work. Sometime toward daybreak, a rooster down in the draws tried out his voice. At first light, a whistle cut the chill, a bright tin note from the road. The post rider loped in and swung down, boots frosted white. "From Judge Caro," he said, handing over a thick envelope with the county seal. Harlan broke wax with a thumbnail. Temporary custody in black letters that didn't shake. Mercy to Ida Kinsley, June to Harlan Tate. The paper felt heavier than most. It felt like a hand placed, solemn and kind, on the small of a back saying, "Keep walking." Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. The sixth sundown slid off the ridge easy. The seventh came in with its shoulders squared. Paper from Judge Caro rode the mantle between Sarah's cross and Ada's butterfly. The ink settled, the county seal gone dull. Harlan checked the bell rope, then the window sacks, then the hinge on the cellar hatch. Habit is a prayer you say with your hands. The wind shifted thin and east, a knife without hurry. Ada felt it first. How the fire leaned a hair the wrong way, how June's breath hitched, and Mercy's fingers found the blanket edge and held. "They're close," Ada said, not looking up. Harlan answered by placing the rifle on its folded coat and setting his thumb to the hammer. The triangle bell stayed quiet, but seemed to think about speaking. They came along the fence like men trying a lock. Silas in the middle, 5 guns spread just enough to look like sense. Torches rode low at stirrup height. Little sons pulling long shadows off the rails. No talking, not tonight. The horses did the talking, iron on rock, then the hushed step when they hit dust. Harlan breathed once, and it was enough. 3, he said, and tugged the bell, not loud. 3 tight rings that barely made the door wake, but Ada knew. She rose, scooped Mercy, gathered June, and ferried the cradle with her foot while her hands were full, hip and shoulder, learning a dance she hadn't known a week ago. The hatch lifted. The cellar took them. When the lid came down, a small fog of warm breath hung a second and was gone. Out the window, the nearest torch nosed past the pump. Harlan set a bead on the flat rock by the trough, not an inch higher, and touched it. Stone spat sparks. The torch skittered. A horse danced a half step, and someone cussed the small cuss a man makes when he doesn't want to admit he's rattled. Silas eased left, looking for the part of the dark that would let him be braver. Harlan cut a second chip off another rock and let the echo carry. You could read what he meant in that echo. Not yours. Not tonight. Not ever, if you keep asking wrong. Lantern light began to climb the grade. First one wobbling halo, then 3 more, then a ragged string that said neighbors. Reverend Merrick in his coat too thin for the cold. Old Hutch with a scattergun older than any of them. 2 field hands from Sagebrush Fork. Sleeves rolled like work never ended. Lanterns swinging ovals of light on the dirt. They didn't holler. They stood where a line ought to be. Silas breathed through his teeth again, that same small sound from 2 nights back, and it told the story. He'd brought more men, but not more courage. One of his hands tried edging the rail. Harlan rolled a third clean shot across the yard, and blue smoke trailed it, thin as morning mist. The hand found a better idea and backed his horse into the road, the way a man steps away from a bad colt. Slow, respectful, careful not to wake the trouble he'd already poked. Not tonight, somebody muttered. And then they were breaking. Not a rout, just that gathering back men do when they remember their own houses and how they'd look without roofs. Hoofbeats unknotted and thinned. Torches pulled small and then were stars you couldn't use. Harlan held the window a while after the night had gone plain again. He eased the hammer down and set the rifle by the pegs. The bell rope stirred as the draft let go, then hung still. He lifted the hatch. Ada climbed out, hair loosed, Mercy heavy with sleep on one shoulder, June awake and scowling like a foreman who'd been left out of a vote. "They can smell milk," Ada said, simple as weather. "Let the bell talk to 'em next time," Harlan answered. He meant, "We have a code and we have a town, and those two things together make a wall you can't see but you can feel." The neighbors did a slow round, peered at prints, checked the fence, looked at the sky as if it might offer minutes back. The Reverend touched the mantel papers the way a man checks a pulse and nodded once. Old Hutch leaned the scattergun by the door and said, "I'll set on the cut bank till first light, not for you, for the babies." It was the same thing. They left as they'd come, lantern halos wobbling one after the other, until the ridge took them and saved the work for morning. Ada set the girls down in the cradle and laid a palm on each small chest, counting what the dark couldn't steal. Harlan sat the rocker and let the chair tell him what the night needed. Nothing loud, nothing proud, just staying put. When sunup grayed the window, Sheriff Tom Quill rode in easy and swung down. He studied the yard like a ledger, hoof marks, torch, ash, the scuff where a heel had chosen home over foolish. "You held it," he said, and bent to the mud by the pump. There lay Mac Cutter's half cigar, soggy, now the end chewed mean. Quill slipped it into a little oilskin and buttoned the pocket. "Vidence," he said, almost amused. Then he set a watch-post at the fence, a cut stake with a strip of cloth tied high, law's way of saying this ground mines are on it. He tipped his hat at the bell, at the sacks, at the cradle. "You got what you need?" "For now," Harlan said. The sheriff rode off. A rooster down in the draws told the new day to come ahead, and the fog that had lounged in the low places took a step back and then another, until the yard stood clear and the house had room to breathe. By noon the ridge had the look of work starting over. Harlan strung a chalk line across the barn front and set new boards where weather had eaten the old. The hammer talked a steady language, neither hurry nor drag, just enough to make the timbers remember they were meant to hold. Ada hauled a pail, sleeves rolled, setting nails in a saucer so he wouldn't have to fish for them. In the yard he turned a narrow strip of soil with the old shovel, earth the color of strong coffee, then worked seeds into his palm, beans and squash, the kind that minded heat and paid you back honest. He made short furrows with 2 fingers, dropped the seeds, pulled the dirt close. Work you do with your hands has a way of talking to your head when words won't. Inside, the second cradle took shape from cedar he'd saved. Square, plain, true. He planed the edges smooth so small legs wouldn't know splinters, set the rockers shallow so the thing would sway like a tired prayer and not a storm. Ada watched, measuring with her eye, then bent to her own quiet craft. From the same strip of blue linen, she cut 2 small bonnets, lined them with good muslin, and tucked a hidden butterfly stitch inside each brim where only a mother's thumb might find it. A mark of keeping, secret and sure. June found the rung of a chair and pulled herself up, knees shaking with the surprise of her own height. She stood wide as a colt at first branding, then crowed with a noise that wasn't a word and didn't need to be. Mercy saw the fallen scrap of linen and belly crawled after it, elbows digging, chin set. The world narrowed to that soft blue square. She laughed when it slid away, and laughed harder when Ada let her almost catch it. Harlan shaved a sliver from a rocker foot and set the cradle on the plank. It moved the way he'd hoped, modest, steady, nothing showy. He let a palm ride the rail, same as he might a good horse after the first mile. "That'll do," he said to the wood, not expecting talkback. Toward mid-afternoon, a buckboard rattled in. Lacey Dunn sang the reins, pulled up near the pump, and reached for a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. "Sugar," she said, "and a little coffee. Don't argue." She lifted her chin toward the east. Freighter in from Sagebrush Fork swears Silas has a camp near Coyote Narrows. Says there's a black mare tied there, knows the way home too well. Lacey didn't linger on the words. She let them land and looked past them at the babies instead, which was a decent piece of mercy in itself. Obliged, Harlan said. He didn't ask for more. News has a shelf life. The good kind burns slow. The bad kind burns fast, no matter what you do. When the light went low and long, the yard settled to that evening hush all ranches know. Wind combing the wire, hens telling each other nothing worth hearing, a horse blowing through his nose just to feel the air. Harlan set the seed sack back in the shed, hung the shovel, and sat the porch step to pull gravel from his boot. Ada came out with a towel damp from washing, and the baby's swaddled light, cheeks apple red from fresh air. He looked at the square of ground he'd turned, then at the 2 cradles through the open door, then at the woman who could set a stitch so fine a knight couldn't find its way through. "I don't ask easy," he said, voice even, eyes on the horizon where the mesa drew its plain line. "Just ask shoulders beside mine." Ada didn't hurry her answer. She set the towel over the rail, shifted June to the other hip, and gave him one small nod that landed heavier than a paragraph. Some promises are made out loud. Some are made where the air can hold them better. In the side yard, old Hutch shuffled up, hat brim low enough to shade his grin. "Don't go wrestlin' the sky, boy," he said, dry as wagon dust. "Find yourself some shade." He spat a seed and stared at the east, like he could see through stone. Harlan smiled without teeth and tipped a boot heel against the stair. Dusk thickened. He hung the triangle bell where the eve cut the last of the sun, gave it one soft ring because the house liked the sound. From the far cut of the country, a different breath answered. The Narrows wind, thin and dry, drawing a knife edge across the ridge the way a man draws a line he means to hold. The sound ran along the barbed wire and laid itself quiet at their feet. Morning broke hard and clear, the kind of light that lays a man's choices out flat. The Narrows wind had talked all night along the wire. Harlan heard it and saddled Blue before the coffee cooled. He checked the bell rope, the window sacks, the cellar hatch, hands saying their prayer again, and looked once at Ada by the hearth. She tied her blue scarf up under her hat, the butterfly pin catching a square of sun and turning it quiet. "Ride straight," she said. "No tremble, just thread pulled snug." "I'll be back," he answered, and meant it as far as a man can mean anything that's got another man's gun in it. Coyote Narrows was a stone throat where wind kept its own counsel. Sheer walls rose on both sides, pucked and sunburnt, a hawk's shadow drifting slow along the face like a memory. Silas waited in the buckle of it, reins loose, hat down, a black mare blowing fog that wasn't there. He looked smaller without the dark around him. Harlan let Blue walk in until stone under a hoof made a sound that put edges on the air. He stopped at a distance that felt honest. No talk. The Narrows didn't ask for it. Silas slid his hand near the butt, and then thought better. Pride can be a slow learner. Harlan's thumb found the hammer. 2 breaths stacked. The world narrowed to sights and bone. 2 shots cracked near together. No drama, just work. Stone spat chips that flashed like minnows. Silas rocked in the saddle, hand to his side, the kind of hurt that sends a man home with a lesson and a limp. Harlan's gun was already flat to his thigh. He spoke like he was measuring fence. "You climb my ridge again, I won't aim for the hip." Silas glared, a promise he couldn't afford, then turned the mare out of the slot, shoulders smaller yet. Harlan watched him clear the bend and let the echo walk itself thin. The Narrows kept its wind. He put Blue to a trot and let the mesa widen out around him. By the time Juniper showed, the day had knocked the shine off itself and turned useful again. In the yard, Reverend Merrick stood with a Bible and a smile that had learned to be careful. Sheriff Tom Quill leaned on the rail, hat pushed back, face clean of argument. Old Hutch occupied the shade like a tree stump with opinions. Ada stepped out in her plain dress, the blue scarf pinned at her throat with the butterfly. The babies blinked at the new brightness and decided to accept it. Harlan swung down, dusted his sleeves, and walked to the spot where the port shadow fell just short of the pump. Good ground, half sun, half roof, a place a vow could find shelter if it needed. The Reverend didn't make a meal of it. Words simple as bread, short as winter day, each one set where it belonged. The sheriff said, "Witness," and meant it. Old Hutch sniffed like somebody had tracked joy onto a clean floor and looked away so his face wouldn't confess. Harlan took Ada's hand. It fit the way a handle does when it's been worn true by work. They kissed the babies on the soft places and signed nothing, because sometimes a yard and a town and a bell will do the writing for you. Toward afternoon, a dust string showed on the lower track, a bay mare with a side bag and a woman who rode straight-backed because paper likes a firm seat. She swung down neat as a pin and tipped her hat. "Pearl Whitcomb," she said, "clerk up to Sagebrush Fork, brought something that belongs in your keeping." Inside the satchel, a stiff envelope with a raised seal, veins in the paper you could feel with your thumb. Pearl broke wax with a pocket knife and read just enough, voice smooth but not proud. "Will of Elias Dorn," she said, "deceased. Name's one Harlan Tate, custodian by deed, that's what it says, on account of action taken and care given. There's no nearer blood-pressing claim. What there was has stood down." She handed the page across. Harlan didn't hurry to take it. When he did, the paper felt like the weight of a hand between a man's shoulders, setting him forward without shove. Pearl glanced at the cradle where June chewed a knuckle, and Mercy slept with her mouth open like a small bird. "Your name sits on the paper," she said, mouth quirking. "But I see it sittin' in that cradle." Ada smoothed the blue scarf at her throat and let out a breath that had been doing quiet work in her since dry arroyo. The sheriff turned the seal to the light and grunted approval. The Reverend tucked his hands in his sleeves like a man who's seen a prayer make bone. They didn't celebrate much. Ada brewed coffee that would float a nail. Pearl took hers black and left the rest of the law with it. Harlan slid the will onto the mantel beside Sarah's cross, Ada's butterfly, and Judge Caro's paper. A small court convened in pine and firelight, the kind of court the West understands. Evening came easy, a soft edge laid along the roofline. Down in town, the church bell tapped 3 quick notes, not alarm, a naming sound walking the draw and climbing the ridge, laying itself gentle over the yard like a hand over a child's back. Ada looked up. Harlan did too. The babies did not, being busy with sleep and the hard work of growing. The bell's last ring thinned into the blue, and the house took the sound and kept it. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They made a court out of the church and a record book out of the hymnal shelf. Morning light fell through wavy glass and laid bars of gold across the pews. Reverend Merrick stood at the end of the table, palms easy, and Sheriff Tom Quill squared the ledger like a fence post made right. The county seal rode in a tin box. When the Reverend pried it up, red wax breathed a sweet, clean smell. Ada held Mercy on her hip and steadied June with a knee. A clerk from Sagebrush Fork wrote slow, neat, saying each letter under his breath as if names heard themselves better that way. Harlan signed and then signed again, hand firm, first June Tate, then Mercy Tate, the ink settling into the paper's grain like seed in a furrow. The sheriff leaned over and set his witness in that hard, block hand of his. The Reverend added his careful script beneath. The seal came down with a soft press and rose, leaving its round oath cooling on the page. The back door creaked and a woman in traveling black slipped in, hat pins catching sunlight. "Agnes Royce," she said, voice Missouri soft. She stayed near the end of the pew until Ada turned and nodded. Agnes came forward and touched the blue linen bonnet Ada had sewn, thumb finding the tiny butterfly stitch hidden inside. Her mouth made a smile that didn't ask for notice. "Looks like they got what they need," she said, and let the line stand for blessing. No speeches, no choruses, only the ledger shut with a wooden thud and the town's hush around it. Out front, the triangle bell on the eave answered with one easy ring when the door opened, a house's way of saying all clear. Afternoon thinned to a long stripe of light on the mesa. Harlan saddled Blue without talk and took the trail to Coyote Narrows alone. The slot held the day's last cool. Wind moved down it like a thought that had somewhere particular to go. Where the walls narrowed hardest, he stacked 3 flat stones into a small cairn, the height of a hat rim. From his pocket he drew the old silver coin, the one he had rubbed thin with years and wagers, and slid it under the top stone with 2 fingers. He rested his palm there until the rock took the warmth. "We hold the living," he said to the stone and the wind and to no one else, "and pay the dead back to dust." He did not linger. The light was going with the fact of it, and there were chores that couldn't learn to do themselves. Back at Juniper Mesa, he found Ada built at the line, pinning the bonnets so they'd catch the last breeze and dry with a bit of shape. The babies watched the cloth move and made round sounds that didn't need words. Harlan set his hat on the porch rail and let the quiet take its share of the hour. Dawn came tapping, not with knuckles, but with telegraph. The run of a wire down the grade into Lacey Dunn's store, then a boy on a pony with a yellow strip folded like a small warning. Lacey rode up herself, dust on her hem, and put the strip in Harlan's hand. "Abilene," she said, not proud of knowing it. "Silas Cutter dead. Bounty mix up a saloon no better than most." The words hung a beat and then settled where they needed to. Harlan folded the paper once and then again, set it under the tin box with the church receipts. He didn't cheer, he didn't mourn. He fed the fire and checked the stock and kissed the girl's hair where it always smelled cleanest. Toward mid-morning he brought in a load of cordwood and laid it by the hearth. The day was calm in that careful way that means a change has been paid for. He set the kettle, trimmed the wick, and reached for the damper. Somewhere inside flew a nest of old creosote woke and hissed. A black cough of smoke shouldered into the room, low and mean, like a snake uncoiling in a tight place. The house took one startled breath. Harlan dropped the kettle and grabbed the poker. The calm broke without raising its voice. The flue hissed like a cornered thing and belched a second mouthful of black smoke. Flame licked the rafters, thin at first, then greedy. Harlan slammed the damper and felt the heat come through the iron like it meant to keep going. He took one step toward the ladder with the poker raised. "Harlan!" Ada's voice cut clean. She caught his sleeve and hauled him backward as the stovepipe coughed sparks along the beam. He fought her for a heartbeat, old habit, a man against a fire, and then went with the pull. She shoved the door wide. Cold air slapped the smoke. The house shuddered like it had remembered something hard. Ada rang the triangle bell, not 3, but a steady 1-2, 1-2, the kind of beat that calls hands. Sound ran down the draw and came back with feet in it. Old Hutch pounded up first with a bucket, cussing the flue in terms a stove would understand. Reverend Merrick came on at a trot with his coat over his head, and 3 boys from Sagebrush Fork behind, each with a tin pail that had watered more stock than fires. Sheriff Tom Quill slid off his horse and set them to a line. Bucket brigade from the pump to the door, up the ladder, across the joist. "Half the roof if we're quick," he said, already passing tin. Ada moved like a foreman that had learned to sew. She thrust Mercy and June into Lacey Dunn's arms without ceremony, wrapped the girls in the blue linen bonnets, and tied the strings with a double knot a wind couldn't argue. Lacey tucked a peppermint into June's fist, because some comforts work faster than a prayer. Harlan went low under the smoke, face wrapped in a wet rag. The mantle showed itself through the haze. The little court of promises, Sarah's cross, the butterfly pin, Judge Caro's paper, the Elias Dorn will. He swept them into a flour sack and handed it blind to the door. Ada took it, coughed once, set the sack by the pump, turned and went after him with her jaw set. A beam cracked like a dry limb in January. Sheriff shouted, "Down!" And the line sagged, then tightened and kept throwing water. Hutch climbed like a man twice as young and slammed a wet horse blanket over the stovepipe throat. Steam screamed, then gave ground. The roof went with a roar along one half, and then, stubborn as a mule, held the other. When it was over, the char ran black across the kitchen like a map of what had almost gone. The pantry smoked and sulked. The room where they'd meant to make a future wore sky for a ceiling. But in the middle of the floor sat the double cradle, scuffed, wet, and safe. Ada lifted the braid where the rail had splintered and found the butterfly stitch still snug beneath, the house's small heart still beating. The whittled bird Harlan had carved once upon a lonely night lay on the hearthstone, singed but whole. He picked it up and set it on the windowsill, blackened wing facing east, like it knew what mornings were for. They slept in the barn that night, the four of them under a canvas that smelled of sweet hay and horse. The cows breathed slow, and Blue shifted once and settled as if he'd been waiting on this job all along. Wind worried the gap in the boards and failed to find a way in. By lantern light, Harlan took out his knife and a strip of cedar he'd saved for nothing in particular. He whittled with the kind of patience a day like this demands. Shavings curled like pale feathers and drifted onto Ada's lap. He set the finished bird beside the singed one, wings wider, head lifted. "For every night we near didn't make it," he said, voice low. Days grew into weeks, and work grew into walls. The town came back with hammer and hymn. Hutch hung new rafters. Reverend read a psalm and then held the far end of a beam. Lacey kept a pot going and a quiet word where it was needed. Harlan set cordwood under the eave, salt jars in a clean, stubborn line. Ada cut new curtains from muslin and with a soft breath pinned the silver butterfly high on the leading edge where the morning light would find it first. The bell went back to its hook and took a test ring. One clear note that laid itself gentle on the rebuilt room. Season turned. A thin snow came early and stayed polite, frosting the fence line, setting a white bug on Juniper Mesa. Inside, the stove ticked like a contented clock. Mercy tried out Ma on a Tuesday, square as a nail, and seemed pleased by how quickly the world reacted. June looked at Harlan as if the answer had always been there and said, "Deal," with a little laugh that made the rafters feel lower and closer. They put the papers back on the mantel, cross, butterfly, seals, dry and lawful as a bank vault. The two birds kept watch, one singed, one new, shoulder to shoulder, like before and after. Harlan rehung the triangle bell in the porch shadow, tied the rope neat, and stood a minute with his palm on the iron, listening to nothing in particular. Ada came up beside him, her hand slipping into his, without hunting for it. "Why us?" she asked, not sadly, not proud. Just the honest wonder a good winter can set in a person. Harlan looked at the rebuilt roof and the small window he'd framed to catch the day. "'Cause an empty house wanted small voices," he said. "'Cause beat-up hands still know how to hold." Night laid down clean. Snow hush softened the yard. The sky took on that deep, good blue a man remembers from boyhood. A breeze came nosing through the cottonwoods and set the bell trembling just enough for one soft ring. It walked the room and decided to stay. The cradle breathed, the stove purred, the town's lights winked down the grade like a gentle kind of constellation. Harlan pressed Ada's hand and felt the weight of all that hadn't been taken. Out beyond the fence, the West stretched its old bones and settled. Some things you get by luck or law. The rest you keep with both hands. Would you like any revisions to tone or detail, or shall I prepare a lightly polished read-aloud script from these 10 parts? Here's where we ease the reins. Some houses are nailed back together with hammers and hymn singing. Some families get stitched with blue linen and a small, stubborn hope. Out on Juniper Mesa, a cradle still breathes, the triangle bell hangs square, and a man with beat-up hands remembers what they're for. If that last soft ring felt like home to you, I'm glad you rode this trail with us. If you'd like to leave a mark, keep it simple. Comment 0 if that final bell sounded right. Comment 1 if you're ready for another ride. And if these clean, quiet stories from the Old West speak to you, subscribe and stick with us. We'll keep the fire banked, the coffee warm, and the next tale saddled. More hard-won mercies, more law and neighbor, more families held with both hands. Until next time, keep your porch light low, your roof tight, and your heart open to the small miracles the wind brings.